Welcome to the end of winter and the Disrupt Education podcast. Allie Dahl, I'm Peter Hostrausler. Allie, what is happening? How was the winter?
Well, I mean, we are in winter right
Yeah.
now. When this comes out, it will hopefully be less winter, though we're definitely recording this before Groundhog's Day, and I can't remember if it's like if he sees his shadow, then winter will last, or if he doesn't, then it will whatever
Shadow
way,
Shadow is shorter. Shadow is shorter
shadow.
winter, I think. Yeah.
Okay, well, I do not think, I'm sorry for anyone that I'm saying this to now. I do not think it's going to be a short winter. I just have a feeling that when this episode comes out in March, that it may still be quite wintry out. We'll see if my prediction is right.
Depends
People
on where
can,
you are. I think, in
yeah,
Minnesota,
the
yes.
Midwest. Yeah. I'm
Maybe.
saying I think the Midwest is going to
Yeah.
be cold. It's going to be a cold winter.
Yeah.
Um, but that's okay. I actually love the Higgy season. It's like the cozy, cold, dark time of the year that the Scandinavian cultures really like just embrace.
hmm
And we've had different guests on the podcast episodes who have talked about like the slower season or the season, particularly Robert Peppo. It comes to mind with like that's the time that you can really push forward and plan for the busy season.
hmm
And I don't think the winter is the slow season for educators. I think summer can be, but this episode coming out at the end of winter, beginning of spring, I think a strong summer starts by planning what you're going to do in the summer. Like, how are you going to disrupt or change or whatnot? You start formulating those ideas now, and then you just really dig into them later. And so, uh, this series, wow, like if you if you want to like bookmark a series to like listen to when you were like, I really want to know how to disrupt education, this these last 11 weeks have been nothing short of incredible. I think it's our best series yet. The guests are just on fire for
Right.
disrupting education. They did not hide it. They were just like full out, but they did it in a way that I think is just approachable for anybody at any level. It's accessible. And if you are feeling, I don't know, like a lull in where you're at in education, this series will start your heart ablaze anew, I think.
Right. No, I agree. I think every one of our guests that we had that in this series were they are people who are in the system. They're working in innovative ways. Some of them will be at conferences and those types of things speaking. But what we got them to share with us are things that you can take now. You don't have to fly somewhere or get into a master class. Those things are great, but not everybody can get into or have access to those, depending on, size of their school or the size of their budgets. So I think I really enjoyed this series because we did have a pretty good mix of people doing a lot of different things in the classroom. And we start off with Mark Isaacs, who, I mean, if you're watching, here's his book, Captivate. It always goes back to trying to figure out, how do I engage people? And what else is interesting about this is we kind of got a little bit deeper into this is engaging educators as well, right? Like, so the book, it does it. He just he's the pyromaniac. He lit it on fire and he starts talking. I mean, he will bring up topics that people are afraid to take on, especially as an admin, because there's so many pieces to it. So how did he captivate us, Allie?
Uh, for me, I think, I mean, he reiterated that we live in a world of digital distractions and that you need a kind of motivational pitch almost to your students. And I think school leaders, you can apply that to the teachers, like you need a motivational pitch to your teachers and those in the system to kind of make change. And he showed this to us by reiterating the fact that 30 years ago, you came to school to get the answers. The teacher was the answers. They had the answers. To find the answers elsewhere was very time consuming and laborious. And now we are in this post digital AI age where every single student has all of the answers at their fingertips. And so, how do you get them to dig into the information is the skill. But many of us haven't transitioned from thinking differently about education. And for me, sometimes it really is, what am I thinking about that's holding me back? And it can be something as simple as I still view myself as the gatekeeper to the information. And what if that is the nugget that you needed to hear or somebody needed to hear in order to get them to open and expand their mind to doing things differently? And I think his approach with that is what makes his work so accessible, even though it's very disruptive. But you want to listen, you're captivated, I mean, by it. But it's like, it's this maybe potential blinder right in front of you, realizing like, oh, I still think about education 30 years ago because that's when I was in school. And how we approach education now really does need to be different. And he offers really, really good ideas in that podcast episode, as well as in his books. So those are some major takeaways for me.
I think the one actionable step that I am thinking about and how we can change education according to the book Captivate and his conversation he had with us was how do we phrase our syllabi and the course descriptions. I think,
Mm.
as I was thinking through this and as we unpack each episode, in my notes here, and I didn't say it on the podcast, so I'm going to say it now in the recap of the series. That's why we do it. Was the actual step of in this course, you will learn how to find the answers to da da da. And I think it's less like you said, me holding on to hey, a young person comes to me with let's just say my internship courses, and they're like, how do I create a resume for this? Okay. That now question is, hey, I searched on the internet and I used AI and I used all these tools and I created this. What do you think now? Rather than how do I? So they're self-engaged, they start themselves, they're captivated with the question, but I don't have the answer because I there's too many answers out there. So it needs to be individualized. So that's what I was thinking about in course descriptions in order, because when students come to school, they're just like, well, the teacher's going to give me the answer. And like you said, it will, and Mark said it in his episode. If you let somebody do something, or if you do something for somebody, they'll let you do it, right? If somebody's gonna, wash your car every day, I'm not gonna interrupt and go wash the car, right? Or do whatever. So I think that was my major takeaway. How to captivate is to really kind of change that questioning over to rather than okay, this class where we will learn about dot dot dot. No, you're going to learn about it, and you're going to learn how to actually find ways that it works in your life. I
Mm.
think those are the interesting things that I took from Mark.
That and getting rid of this phrase like, oh, well, we don't have time for that, or we don't have time for fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why shouldn't that be like the main thing? Like
Yeah.
learning is fun. Some people naturally, like myself, think learning is fun, think it is a fun activity. Not everyone has had or has like the bend towards thinking that. Whatever experience they had along the way that made learning not fun. I want, people listening to this should try and think about, when was learning the most fun for me? Think of a memory, hold on to it, write it down. It might be a really good journaling activity. You pause the podcast here and really just sit and think like, what are some of my top most fun learning experiences? And then think about like what made them fun, kind of do a little expose on that. And then think, okay, how can I bring those elements into the classroom. And if you're a school leader, the same thing. Like, when was the last time you had fun in a meeting? How can you bring fun to the meetings? Like, I don't know. I've been in meetings that have been very fun and very
Right.
productive and non-traditional and disruptive, whatever you want to call. And I've also been to very, very boring meetings and et cetera. You can apply this at any level. And I just think Mark really challenged us to think about, where is the fun? Because that's what gets people excited to be anywhere. Like, me and you have a lot of fun recording these podcasts. We do. Like,
Yeah.
we spend a lot of time off the air, probably just as much, if not more, planning and preparing, and it's fun for us. We're always like, "Ooh,
Yeah.
where are we going to go next? What are we going to do?" And it's this fun problem to solve, but we're not like we don't have the answers. We like literally want to get answers to questions that we have, and then we go find people that might have them, and it's a fun
Yeah.
process, right? Like, so you want to
Hmm.
do it,
Yeah.
and like that's just the challenge for us all.
And Mark carried that along. It was kind of nice to, that episode came out on New Year's Day, and um, he continued with what we ended off last year with Jen Sharp. There's fun, make it fun. So that was, I really liked that transition into 2025. We didn't ask him to do that; he just did it. So it worked really well with our episodes. We did then move ahead with empowering CTE, innovation failure, and industry connections with Dr. Sandra Adams. Um, an amazing, interesting school in Indiana. Yeah, what were your takeaways from Dr. Sandra Adams? Sandy, we called her
Oh,
Sandy.
yeah. So I love that she was a literacy coach and just kind of like brought it home for I just remember all of this time being like, should we front load kids, front load kids, front load kids on vocabulary? And everything says that doesn't help. You can't give meaning to someone else. And if they don't know industry language or like the vocabulary at all out of context, it's not going to stick. And so her approach to putting students into work-based learning internship type experiences, um, and giving students a productive struggle, like giving them like these high expectations, as well as industry language, talking to experts, then figuring out like, where are the gaps, and that's how you really learn. And I mean, we saw that over and over again as the series evolved, but it was really, really interesting to hear it from somebody who studied literacy, did like instructional coaching, and wanted to develop better professional development, and then went and observed, and kind of like, just the way her story evolved was really interesting, like was watching, how could work-based learning and stuff improve and CTE improve. And then she went out through serendipitous encounters, was able to start a program that now is just like going berserk in Indiana. It's amazing, but it's like 10 years later.
Yeah,
And so she talks about like, you can start with literally like 9 students, one
mhm,
class,
yeah.
and it can grow.
I mean, this, if you want to call this series, no disrespect for anybody in other states, but there were a couple people from Indiana in this one.
Yeah.
It's all Don Wettrick's fault. Don, it's your fault. You're just too awesome over there. However, my actionable steps with Sandy and some of the things that she was saying, we were kind of working it out before that episode, but it really was the terms, the correct industry terms. What we do now within our courses is we have our students try to list out, and we're recreating the way that we're doing this, but have them list out a number. It could be 10, 20, 50 industry terms, and in the industries that they're at that point interested in. So we're giving them the skill to actually go seek that out, seek it out on podcasts, seek it out on shows, on YouTube channels, TikToks, whatever. Get industry terms, LinkedIn, and connect with people. The other thing that I really liked that we're taking away from that is the conversations, right? Even my own daughter, we're having conversations about, she wants to go into the marketing industry, not really sure. She's very artistic. She want to utilize those skills. And I'm connecting her with people But she has to kind of create some questions, lead in questions, kind of like what we do, right? We've learned so much as interviewers on a podcast. So those terms, and not really front end loading it. Like you can't set things up because life is moving so fast. I really like that. Hey, let we just stop front end loading it, let the kids build it. And it kind of goes back, kind of connecting with what Mark was saying on the previous episode, is kind of just get out of their way, but make it fun. Like let's go on a treasure hunt, let's do something. And again, I hear a lot of people are like, this is CTE, CTE, CTE. How do I do this in English or whatever other courses? Everything is CTE, right? Why do you need to learn history? Why do you need to learn math? Why do you need to learn English and so on and so forth? Well, they connect. So if you individualize, I think this whole series has been people in the system working within some of the blockers that are out there, but still doing these fun, innovative things. So I really liked how Dr. Adams took that, and we missed her. Unfortunately, when we were down in San Antonio, she was just so busy. She was doing a stint master class, I think, with Kevin and at Catapult, but we just missed her. So I was a little bummed with that one. But yeah, that was a great igniting change kind of thing, and we continued that as we went into Indiana again, and we jumped into Jason Walke. What an amazing number one, his own story was amazing, and then number two, it was really like the internships that every student was graduating with within a small rural, mind you, it's a private school, but still rural area of Indiana. What were your takeaways with Jason?
I mean, the agility, I know I said this on the podcast when we recapped it, but if you didn't hear it the first time, rural schools and small school districts, I think, are the power players right now because they have the agility to adapt and change much faster than anybody else right now. And that agility and time, speed, like the fact that they're doing something this year and they're going to totally change their schedule in the school year next year, and they're going to have like these mission Mondays
Hmm.
where it's basically like they're not off of school, but they're not following a school schedule, and the internships will run those days, and then they can put all the field trips on those days. I just think the type of innovation that school is doing, as well as other schools like that size can do and have the possibility to do, you are in such a power seat to recruit. And I don't know if it's because we have these conversations or, that I'm talking about it with other people, but I get all these articles now about the more millennials in particular, probably since my demographic, are like interested in and wanting to move to these rural areas. And I just don't think it's a coincidence, or it is a coincidence of things about there is a lot of benefit to being in a rural area. Like my family lives in a rural area. And at first I remember them talking about like all the differences and how they're going to miss all these city things. And now it's like the opposite. They're like, oh, I don't miss any of those city things. I it can't imagine how I used to live in the city. I mean, like there's two sides to that, but his story of being an industry, a golf expert, and then using that to kind of come home and bring those skills to the community and kind of enhance the internship program and change it and get kids plugged into their community is just incredible. And it does show the power of a small tight-knit community. And I'm certain that the community has seen growth in those years. And I wonder now the next step, I feel like if it's not already being done for Jason there, is to kind of document the economic impact that those internships and the programming is having, because it's just going to snowball and create even more desire. We did get to that in our last guest of the series, but I'm just saying, like, you kind of go back and listen to the opportunities, like no matter where you're at, like if you're already built a CTE program and you want to take it to the next level, like there's tons of resources in this series. And even if you're not a quote unquote CTE teacher, okay, I would hand off this series to anybody and be like, you can apply these things no matter what you teach, no matter if you're a school leader or a superintendent or whatnot. There's so much that you could use in these episodes. And if you know someone who works in a rural area or a small, charter school, small community, this is the episode for you to connect with,
Yeah.
because the work he's doing is just perfect for where he's at.
Right. You remember his titles, like he had like 15 different titles. But I think, the takeaway, the actual steps that I took away from Jason was, number one, just looking at things a little bit differently. When you can adapt, I do know that my teammate and I actually reached out to him before the podcast and were like, "What are you doing?" Right. And by the way, we're a suburban, very large, have a lot of assets in our community, and we're asking a very small rural educator. Why? Because there's a lot you can learn from him. You can, I mean,
Yep.
he's hustling, he's understanding. He doesn't have to deal with a lot of the red tape, may be a little bit different, I should say, than the red tape that we have to deal with. So I think we can all learn together. It used to be, oh, these rural, schools are just not da 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 da. I don't believe that. I think what
Mm-mm.
Jason really brought to the table was a mindset. He brought an attitude of, hey, we can do this because we can flex, like you said. And I know we're going to have him back on the podcast talking about that Monday that
I
they
know.
have, that is just a day that is not a in school day. I think that is unbelievably innovative. I've heard of other schools out there. So if you guys heard, or anybody's in another school that's doing that, yeah, reach out to us, because we'd like to talk to you. But they're seeing it in a rural area, and they're taking that risk. And again, I just those actionable steps are, take some risks, see what you can do differently, pulling down, barriers between, learning from each other, how to pull those internships, the community into other areas of your school outside of CTE, or your tech program. So yeah, just a humble guy, and I really liked how he's just, yeah, I'm doing this, and it was almost like expected, like I'm going to do this, and he came into it with a vision. But if you listen to that first part of that podcast, his path is a big reason why he is where he's at. So I think that's something else that I really liked. Um, and then we went on to invest in our best. And that was Dr. TJ Vari, a guy that I sat down with next to on an impromptu presentation at the ACTE conference in San Antonio, when another great previous guest, Christy Valesky, was like, "You need to be on this panel." I was going to listen to it. And we met our actual last two guests from that panel discussion. TJ sat next to me. He was like, "Disrupt education. I love it." And then we just struck up a conversation, and here we were. Investing in your best. That's what we said in that episode. We're going to name the episode this. What were your takeaways from TJ?
I mean, I love his story. His story just speaks to going out and becoming an expert in one area. He was in the restaurant industry, then came in education. And it was kind of interesting because Jason Walkie was that way. And even Dr. Sandra Adams had, this story of, she was in the classroom, then went out, then to come back in. And even our next, like, to round out the season, Jason Van Nuss, which we'll get to, also had that. And I think what I loved about TJ's episode is he put in the work. He went from a teacher and kind of grew up the ranks, so to speak, did the quote unquote academic elite route. That was another thing that kind of a lot of these people were in the system at many different levels. And his strength, one of many, one, he was this English teacher, he loves writing books. He has resources for you. Like, he loves books. He has 6 books as of now. Probably by the time this episode comes out, he'll have another one out.
Yeah.
But he, if you listen to that episode, you will hear time and time again, he's interested in doing what works, and like emphasis on the doing part. And so, he had like a year to like turn a school around, and he was like, no problem, basically. I mean, I don't know if that's how he like internally felt,
Hmm.
but he was able to do it because he was like, oh, I'm used to turning restaurants around. Like, this is just a bigger restaurant, so to speak. But it was because of his experience and work ethic and just kind of trying things and putting his head down and doing the work that got him to that place. And so for me, I think the real nugget in that episode is that if you feel like your head's down in the work, it's not going anywhere, he really showed kind of this avalanche of, or really, like if we're talking about like a spark into a flame, into a fire, into a bonfire, into like a wildfire, his work now is really catching fire in terms of its capacity and scaling. And so I think, again, his story shows how you can start small and it can really expand and it can really grow. And I think we're really starting to see a lot of these programs that either didn't exist or were in their infancy 10 years ago, Peter, when you started this podcast, are now becoming way more robust. So it's really kind of cool to be at this juncture in the podcast to be like, there have been people who were feeling like you were feeling, who were alone, quote unquote, and were heads down in the work of disrupting education 10, 15 years ago, that now we're finding have and are building these really great programs that we're able to showcase on the podcast, and then see where they go beyond, in the next 10 years, because it's only going to get better. So it's like I was thinking of all these timelines with these guests, and most of them started something 8 or more years ago, which is when you started the podcast. And I was like, oh, they all went through the same thing that
Yeah.
Peter went through when he started the podcast. So that was kind of a cool realization to think about. Which is, if we're thinking about this series being starting and setting fire to educators who work in the system and to conventions that don't, which is Mark's phrase, then this series really kind of shows the timeline for that. And don't be, held back by, if you're in the first couple years, like there is more to go and to do, and you will get there. Very encouraging.
And along with that, I think if you look back, and it did make me reflect a little bit about like why was like 2015 such a big kind of movement in education, that what it was the build with all. And you're right, a lot of the people that we have talked to, yeah, it was around that like 12 to 8 to 12 years ago. As I was reflecting, I was thinking, well, that was when the ginormous college debt kind of crisis really hit its peak. You had a lot of millennials who were just getting hammered, and walking out with degrees from even reputable institutions with a couple $100,000 plus in debt, with high interest rates and zero like entry level gigs, or even below, under employed. So yeah, I think that's where I think all of us started, and we had this in the conversations where we just started questioning, like, what the hell are we doing here? Why are we sending everybody down this one path? And in the name of whatever equity or whatever, oh, everybody has to have an education, da 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 da, and it just wasn't working. And I think a lot of us just got mad. So, and lit it up, So I think the other half of that, and you really nicely outlined, investing in your best, and like let's turn these things around. Let's see what happens in the restaurant industry to a school. I like the viable futures, right? I think that was the other thing that I took. The actionable steps is really now when we should, what we're making it a point, and of course, in our internship programs, we are teaching juniors and seniors. However, beforehand, what we want a junior and or senior to say is when the question is asked, like, what's next for you? When you walk across that stage, what's next? It's not, I guess I'll go to college or I guess I'll go to a trade, which I like TJ was saying everything is college, which is very interesting. I like how he started to change. If you're going to go back to Dr. Adams, like you're changing the term of college. College is actually not a 4 year. It's not a 2 year. It's not a trade program. It's all of those. So he kind of unpacked that. But walking out, and I have it here in my notes here. So I want to make sure I got a viable post-secondary plan. Right. I
Mhm.
want so what you want students to say is I'm not I guess I'm going to no, I'm going to go in and I'm going to start studying economics. I want to start studying, marketing. I'm going to start studying, finance. I'm going to study history, whatever it is, and even deeper into a plan. I'm going to start right now. The plan is dot dot dot. And if we can get kids to that point, I think we're going to eliminate a lot. And that where it was kind of the undertone. This was the before and after when we were talking to TJ because we had a lot of conversation before and after. I wish we just do like an undercover recording, but it was about like the kids not saying something just to have you like what they're saying. Of course, yeah. Well, Allie, yeah. So Allie asked me what I'm doing after high school. Well, I'm going to Harvard and I'm going to go 4 years. Just yeah, all right. I'm blowing that up, but like, yeah, I'm going to go to a school. Da da da. And it still is a little BS when kids say this, and because they think they don't want to disappoint, right?
Right.
And I think changing that narrative, TJ went into that on and off camera when we were doing that. So I think our actionable steps there for at least our program is going to be, all right, great, you're going to go. I don't want to hear you say I guess in that conversation. I guess I'll go. No, let's that's fine if you're uncertain. Let's try to put a plan down right now. You can, but in that, we're also helping people become flexible and being able to pivot because they know their skill sets. So,
Mhm.
just to give people a plan and say, no, you're worth it. What do you really want to do? We talked about, I think, one of our internship students who went deep into really talking about her gap year program, but it was planned out the entire year. She knew where she was going, she knew what she was going to be doing. It wasn't like I'm going to do a gap year and then, I don't know, maybe jump on an Amtrak and ride around. No, it's like I'm going to do something. So that was my biggest takeaway with TJ. Yeah, go ahead. What you got?
No, I mean there's a lot from TJ's episode. And I think the most disruptive thing he said on the podcast, which I mean, reach out to him and ask him about this.
He
But
gave
he
his
said
phone
if you
number.
he did
It's on the episode. If you want to look at the notes,
is
you can call him up.
you can is he said if you don't have a plan, stay in school.
Yeah.
I mean, he was like, don't close the door. And it is interesting because I've oscillated on this, and I'm not saying I like agree or disagree with him, but I have told students, so like as an example, states usually require like 3 years of math.
Right.
And I would always encourage students to stay in a math class, even if it was like, like math in the real world. Like I don't
Right.
care what it was, because math is problem solving. And I have just seen how when students check the box with math and don't do it, it closes so many doors. And then I've heard so many times like, I wish I had kept going in math or had just understood math a little bit better. And I'm not saying you need, calc 3 in college, but it's like
I'm laughing because
originally.
I didn't take Calc 1. I'm a stats guy. I don't know. So,
But still, I just think that like having numeracy, having um kind of your some idea of mental math and how to apply math. I'm down. I'm not saying like, oh, just go sign up for frivolous math classes that aren't going to help, but this idea that like when you shut down learning, right? If you don't have a plan, you're going to potentially shut down your brain, and then you really don't have mentors. You don't have an environment, a community to help guide you. And so, like, if you can, and there is funding available, he also, I believe
Hmm.
this was on air, talked about how much, like, how many scholarships and stuff were just left on the table,
Yeah.
unused, available for people uh, to keep going and further their education. So I would advocate for this plan.
Hmm.
And if you don't have a plan, to stay engaged in some kind of learning community.
Right.
I don't know what that looks like specifically for you, but if you have someone in the end of high school age, you can really help them by guiding them to a plan, especially if they don't know, and one that includes continued learning.
Hmm.
I think there is a lot in that. Whether it's go to school, I don't know, TJ, but continue your learning. I would say don't unplug from the system,
Right.
because I mean, I'm pretty sure he also said this on air, but he said, like, you're gonna be poor if you don't. I
Yeah.
was like,
No. Yeah. Yeah. If you,
take it or
yeah.
leave it. He's
Right.
he's being honest.
And I like that because there was like, I mean, there are certain things in there that I didn't quite agree with. I mean, there are some stats and different things like that around, the cost versus the ROI. But I think that was traditional. I think what he meant was, if you do find these things, if you do go to a community college, if you do go to, something other than a 4 year and dump, 40, 50, 60 grand into your first year, um, which they're out there. And what, like what you said, you have to look for them, and and again, we have career counselors in our schools. However, it needs to be part of the culture of school,
Mhm.
to help you, and he said it again, individualized learning. So um, at this point, I think he was using it as like a stopgap. Like, look, man, in this day and age, you still got to stay curious and keep building. But yeah, there's a lot in there that, and that's just who he is. I think that's why he liked my card when I sat next to him, disrupt. And then actually the moderator for that panel was Jason Van Noos. And he was our final guest that we had to break that up into two podcasts because there is, and I'm going through 3 or 4 pages of notes. I told you before that podcast even came out, I actually sent the audio to uh, our team at where I work, and I was like, "This guy's just changed our outlook on what we can do. Let's have meetings and plan around what Jason said here." Just to kind of like set this up, where Jason and I have been interacting here and there on LinkedIn. Had I known, and this is why I think it's important to have these conversations even beyond, because LinkedIn will show you so much, and meeting people. I think that's the power of a podcast. I think it's a power of going somewhere. The podcast is obviously cheap. I mean, you just turn it on and you can hear what people's conversations are. But at this the ACTE conference, I was lucky enough to go with our team from Naperville. Um, we I hit his Friday afternoon. Okay, it was a 4:30 p.m., 4 o'clock to 4:45 session, on a Friday at a conference, and it was standing room only. So that's when I knew, uh-oh, something big is happening here. So we have Jason Van Noos. Where do you want to begin, Allie?
I mean, I,
That's a
wow.
loaded
Well,
question.
we disrupted our own podcast because of him. Let's just start there. It was so rich. And we were, yeah, I don't know, 45 minutes in. I'm like looking down. I'm like,
Yep.
I have so many questions. I haven't asked any of them yet. And everything he was saying was like stuff I wanted to dig into. So, right, if you didn't listen to that episode, like, it's a must. It's probably, I mean, so far, like, in terms of just, you would want to work with him.
Right.
Like, this is when I think of like embodying the spirit of disrupting education, I think of Jason now because he's really in the work, but his approach his cadence. You want to listen to him. You want to learn from him. He's so humble, and yet he's doing things that are going to make and are making a difference in his community. And on the opposite of Jason Walkie, right? He works in a big school district.
Hmm.
And so like it just shows what's possible. And I love the range that we had in this series because it really doesn't matter where you're located or what size of school institution you're at. Like these things can be done, are being done. And I think, man, the best part of the episode is when Jason is like, if your talent pipeline, which he believes that high school students are the best investment in your talent pipeline for your community, if you do not have an origin, destination, and content for them, you are basically, your school is building out for your competition.
Hmm.
You are developing your work talent, your basically your future of your community, and you are building them up to go work and be an economic benefit to someone else. And I was like, whoa, that stopped me in my tracks. I was like, I was convicted, right? Like
Hmm.
of what he was saying, and that's the opportunity. Like that's the messaging. If you want to help get your community on board, he really lays out a strategy for how to do that and why it's needed, right? Like why we need to develop our young people and build it for our own community. He just mic dropped that completely. Where do you want to go? Because I mean, it's like we had like 2 hours of content.
Right. Yeah, there was so much. I really though, just on a kind of a 10,000 feet level of this series, he legitimately took what Mark Essex wrote about captivating, and I felt like that was an example of how to captivate people. I mean, he did totally captivate us, understanding, a lot of the different things that he has done. But then, like you said, when he was speaking very frankly, but in the gentle disruptor, if you remember, right? He was just very frank. He was like, if like you said, if you're not harnessing the power of the next generation of your school, and I'm talking, he was talking to his businesses and in the community, then they will not. They will go work for your competition. He was very matter of fact. He actually backed it up with numbers. I think one of our first questions is how can we, and going into my actionable steps is like how can we actually look at the economic benefits of our internship programs. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, we have like team-based challenges and we have all these different things that happen across the board in our school, not just CTE, um, but the localized talent and really understanding, look, let's not really, and I've never heard this before, but let's not look at this as like, this is, we're just going to give to the high school because it's nice. He basically let him know, yeah, you can do that, but they're going to go elsewhere, right? You're not going to get that. And he really changed the way that we are marketing our internship and community relationships, the way that we're looking at them, and the way that we are really going to and have been marketing and speaking to our partners in the community. It really, it was like it just got real, like with them, and it was just like, wow, he's doing this and he's growing exponentially. And all this started with the conversation around the reverse career fair. And that's what his entire presentation was on in San Antonio, was how he did that. And that was a great way to show, look, this not only students like this is, there's competition out here. There are things that you can show people that they want right now. And they want, I mean, when I say I say students can show people that they have these skills and that people are willing to interact with you, mentor you, connect with you, hire you, become part of the internship program, whatever. he just reminded me of just a coach that's just going to tell you how it is. Now, in my frame, like where I grew up, like it was, and maybe this is just Midwest. I mean, it was hardcore, Bobby Knight kind of, and it was straight, I'm going to give it to you straight. But there was a lot of yelling. There was a lot of, chair throwing, all different kinds of stuff, right? That's just how I grew up. Not saying it's right or wrong, but Jason being from the South, it is really this just gentle disruptor. Like I really love the ways like, look, I mean, we can do this either way. And I did this when I was in as an entrepreneur, but we can do this either way. Either I can sell you the advertising for your place, or I'm going to go somewhere else, and whoever gets it is going to get a great, localized da 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 of advertising. So what do you want to do? And by the way, here are the numbers. And it was just so mind-boggling to really kind of, do that. Um, you know, I I really like, he was just mimicking great programs. There's a lot of, you know, there were so many notes. I'm going through them right now, but I just really, really liked, look, um, these are the opportunities. This is why I'm offering you something better. Yeah, there's so many things here. Yeah,
I, I just
yeah,
I just think the opportunity of the reverse career fair is absolutely incredible
right.
for students to see because they really don't you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
And the opportunity for engagement in a reverse career fair. I mean, I he said this that the kids before the career fair absolutely, dislike it, don't want to do it,
Sure.
but then like afterwards it's just like this is the best thing ever. Sometimes you need an experience like that that you can't opt out of to realize its benefit. Like we're afraid of the unknown. It's a lot of people with skydiving, they like are terrified. They're doing it for XY reason. They may not really want to, they're terrified. But on the other side of it, they're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I don't know what life was like before I did this. For high schoolers with this reverse career fair and this ability to really dive into what are your strengths, what do you like doing, presenting it is kind of like, I mean, it's kind of laissez-faire. I mean, he has plug and play, he has resources for this. He's very like giving and open
Yeah.
about this. So if you like want to dig into this, this is 100% available to you. And the opportunity for kids is really, unmatched in terms of like you might meet someone who sees your potential that you wouldn't have ever considered if you didn't put yourself out there in kind of a generic, it's more generic because you don't know who you're talking to. You're just literally saying like I'm really organized, or I really enjoy drawing, or I'm musically, I like editing things. Like I don't know all of the details of what you would put on your kind of profile and present yourself, but
Hmm.
you are saying these are things I'm good at, I like to do, etc. You're presenting it. You're meeting people who might be like, those are exactly the types of skills that I'm looking for as a basis to then develop you as XYZ.
Right.
And students really don't necessarily know that certain skills and their personality and things they like to do, how that translates into a career.
Yeah.
And if you ask many, 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 many people, you ask them like, how did you get into the career you're in? And like, what was your degree in? Oftentimes they don't match. And it's usually something, if they're really in something dynamic and that they love and whatnot, it's probably somebody saw their potential in something put into them. Well, why aren't we doing this at the high school level?
Right.
And I mean, that career fair in itself is so disruptive in like all the best ways. It's age appropriate, it's like timely, it's so dynamic, and there's so many different ways. He shared different ways you can do it. Like he does it this one way, but he's like the opportunity could be varied and specific to programs and people even with more dialed in interests, like a health teacher running a senior health related internship program could do this. It doesn't just have to be the way he does it.
Right. That's an entire course that when he broke it apart, and if you want to like look him up on the all his connects and everything on the podcast, do that because he shares it all out. He's what he does is basically it's an entire course. We used to have it at my previous school. It was called career planning. I think it should be a graduation requirement across the United
Mhm.
States, to be honest. And like you said, it really brings out any area of students. Like he was talking about, he had um, high ranking politicians at the table. So if you're somebody who wants to go poli sci, well, you guess what? That not may not be manufacturing like we're talking about. That can be history. There's a lot of writing, there's English, there's so many different things. And like you said, the skills that people have, like, yeah, I'm really organized, blah, blah, blah. Those are so surface level. What this forces kids to do, and they don't like it at first, but at the end of the day, they love it. Is that they're forced to show what they know, like show a portfolio kind of thing, and on your table when you're doing your reverse career fair. And guess what? I really liked how he's just very real about it. If your table is not, let's go back to Mark, captivating people, right?
Mm.
Then they're not going to come talk to you. So and trust me, he doesn't leave kids out to hang out. And it's like, oh, don't do this. There's a whole program that he has. I know I have like 500 pictures of his slides when I was out in San Antonio. So those are like he's so real. I think when it comes to education, there is nothing left like there's no assumptions. And I really like the way that he presented those two podcasts without assumptions. He was like, because this is how, and even if there was an assumption, there was already something that was figured out, and this is what happens. So he really brought reality into the classroom, which was a little bit different than a lot of our guests, like going out, outside of a classroom. So and it does work both ways. If you have to be in the class or outside of the class, yes, the big presentation and everything was outside of the classroom, but the consistency, the pieces that each student had to go through, and then now people were coming in, organizations, opportunities, and seeing the power of these students. And then there it is. He would flip it back and say, well, they're yours, or they're going to go off to the next level somewhere else, and your competition's going to pick them up. So, how do you want to do this? And I'm here to work with you. So, I think that was just brilliant. We may be working with a couple of these people on this series and more. We have some interesting opportunities going up. Where do you see us going from here, Allie? What's next?
Well, I do want to, before I fully answer this,
Final
I
thought
do
there.
want to say
Yeah.
he brought it home. We didn't, know he was gonna just circle this
Right.
series out. It just kind of naturally happened. But he really did end the second episode with this idea, like I kind of asked him, like, why do people, maybe don't want to disrupt and don't like the phrase disrupt education, and like why is that triggering for so many people? And he talked about education is, there's kind of this, whether you like it or not, it's assumed to be a safe space.
Hmm.
And when you question or put into question potential safety, people get into fight, flight, or freeze, and then they don't want to do those things. So you do have to, it does take time. But he very much kind of also approached it with getting rid of and burning these sacred cows
Hmm.
that we have. And so when we think about disrupting education, sometimes we literally do have to have a barbecue, as he said,
Yeah.
and, you know, just burn down these sacred cows that we've held in some kind of esteem and idolized as the way to do education. And we think back to Mark with just captivating students, and how do we do that? And it's not 30 years ago. You aren't the answer key. You aren't the the information hub. Then we have to look at ways to kind of disrupt education while still maintaining the safe space. But sometimes in order to do that, you have to acknowledge the fact that you are burning a quote unquote sacred cow. So there's layers to this work, and each of our guests bring such dynamic and interesting points of view that, there's something in this series for literally everyone. And where are we going next? Well, of course, we're going to keep disrupting education for sure. And, Dr. TJ Vari really in, the other part of his episode that he talks about is school leadership and the importance of school leadership. And so I think kind of digging into that more is a good space for us to kind of look at for the spring. And just a little tease. We're not going to give it all away, but we're always looking for different ways to kind of help you, not only with your mindset around disrupting education, but real people doing real work and making these conversations available to you, how we can be better together. And there really does feel in the last 6 months for sure of recording podcast episodes, this convergence happening with all these people who have been heads down in the work are like popping up, and more of them are sharing their body of work publicly on spaces like this, where now disrupting education has never been easier, and setting fire to education has never been easier. And so it's getting hot.
Yeah.
Hope winter's over by the time this podcast comes out for you, because 2025 is really just ablaze with opportunity in the education space.
Spring cleaning is what I call it, right? We're about ready to jump into, how do we clean things up that we can clean? How can we control what we can control? And we will likely be talking to some leaders in education to see, what is next. So I'll just leave that little carrot out there. What a wonderful series. Hit any of these and every one of these. Look us up. We're very active on LinkedIn. That's probably our sole place where I've had a lot of conversations and met a lot of people there. And again, we do get a lot of requests. Keep them coming in. I know sometimes we don't get back to you, but we have a lot. And we just want to remind you, share this podcast out. Don't forget to hit that subscribe, like, and there's bells out there, on different platforms to notify you. Every Wednesday morning, we actually, in the United States, East Coast time, I think it is, or maybe it's Central Time, 5 a.m., a new episode will come out. So we're going to be here for you. Utilize this. Wonder if we can get some professional development around this. I'm just leaving that right there. All right. So for Allie Dahl, I'm Peter Hostrasser. Hey, thanks a lot. This is a great series. We got another one coming up next week. We'll talk to you next time on the Disrupt Education Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us on this week's episode of the Disrupt Education Podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe so you never miss an episode.
Are you ready to disrupt the educational arena you're a part of? For more ways to get involved in the work we do here at Disrupt Education, check us out at disrupteducation.co or find us on LinkedIn at Peter Hostrasser or Allie Privet.
Our mission here is to help facilitate and amplify changes in the educational system through local initiatives and help you scale them into community movements. Our building network of disruptors in education are working to move beyond scores and grades as the only measure for student learning. If your school district, college, campus, or organization is looking for facilitators of this work, reach out on our website or social media.
And if you have any thoughts or feedback on this week's episode or any episode, we'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep pushing the boundaries, taking risks, and most importantly, disrupting education.